What if everything you fear isn't out there in the world, but inside you? This question is not just a phrase, it's a calling, an invitation to look beyond the obvious. It echoes like an ancient bell in a monastery forgotten by time. A sound that doesn't just call your ears, but your very soul to awaken. There's an image that has haunted me for years, a vision that returns to my heart whenever the outside world becomes deafening. A solitary monk sitting on the edge of an ancient stone cliff, eyes gently closed, hands resting in his lap with the delicacy of someone holding his own destiny. The wind howls violently around him. It shrieks between the rocks, trying in vain to disturb that still center. But within him, there is only silence, and this silence is not absence, it's not emptiness. It is the purest presence of self, and it is there in that image that our journey begins today, a crossing into the territory of fear. Fear of silence. Fear of your own inner voice. Fear of what we find when all distractions finally fall away. Because perhaps, dramatic pause, the noise you feed every day isn't just distraction, it's defense. And perhaps the silence you avoid so desperately is the only true path back to what is essentially yours. Look around. We're surrounded by constant stimuli, notifications that buzz in your pocket like little hits of dopamine, voices competing for your attention, screens glowing with promises of instant happiness, always a tap away. But behind every click, pause. There is a silent escape, a muted sprint, an almost desperate effort not to hear what screams in the vacuum of our own chest. Silence in our times has become dangerous ground, a forbidden land. It doesn't dazzle us with fleeting lights. It doesn't soothe us with external validation. It doesn't entertain us with endless novelty. It simply shows us completely naked, stripped of personas, without filters or edits, and that's why we avoid it like a contagious disease. But it is precisely there, in the dark chamber of silence, that the soul finally begins to speak its forgotten language. And what it says, long pause, isn't always beautiful. It isn't always comfortable. It isn't always easy to accept. The truth rarely is. The practice of silence is not just an auditory pause. It is a supreme act of courage. It's a necessary confrontation, a facing of who you've truly become, and everything you chose to leave behind along the way. Since ancient times, the desert has always been the refuge of prophets, mystics, and hermits. Not by accident. There, where the landscape is stripped of all superfluous things, where there are no distractions or escapes, the human spirit is finally forced to reveal its true nature. Silence is not a wall separating us from the world. It is a crystalline mirror, and in it, inevitably, we see what we've worked for years to avoid. Saint Anthony the Great, one of the first Christian hermits, fled to the Egyptian desert in search of God. But there, in the absolute silence of the endless sands, he first found his own demons, inner voices whispering old shames, temptations more vivid than the dunes, painful memories amplified by the desert. Everything surfaced like underground water finally finding a crack to emerge through, because silence doesn't erase the internal and chaos. It simply makes it finally audible, and that is exactly what we fear the most. Not silence itself, but what it inevitably reveals. The chronic dissatisfaction we chew like gum day after day. The important words that stayed stuck in our throats. The emptiness in our relationships filled with tiny distractions. The constant mental noise that in silence amplifies until it feels deafening. But this mirror, no matter how terrifying it seems, is absolutely necessary. We can only cleanse what we can clearly see. We can only heal what we have the courage to touch. Modern life offers us an endless menu of ways to run from ourselves. Social media we scroll through compulsively until our eyes burn. Series we binge watch in endless marathons, schedules packed with commitments that keep us from breathing, infinite to-do lists that never end, and we call this productivity. We call it a full and accomplished life, but deep down, it's just noise, a sophisticated disguise, a digital armor against meeting ourselves. The soul, when systematically ignored, doesn't scream. It gets sick quietly. It shows up in anxiety, attacks that come without warning, in sleepless nights where the ceiling seems to judge us, in a deep fatigue that no weekend can cure. The medieval mystic Thomas à Kempis once wrote words that feel more necessary now than in his own time. Flee the noise of words and the crowds, for it is in solitude that a man truly purifies himself. But who today is truly willing to retreat, to sit for just 10 minutes doing absolutely nothing, without compulsively scrolling, without seeking external validation in tiny digital reactions to our existence? We run desperately from silence because it forces us to feel, and feeling is infinitely harder and scarier than just running. But there comes a moment when something extraordinary happens. Silence stops being a threat and becomes a refuge. It doesn't happen suddenly like a lightning bolt. It's a gradual process. The soul needs to relearn how to trust this sacred space. At first, it's uncomfortable, almost unbearable. The mind throbs with impatience, demands entertainment, screams for stimulation. But with time and persistence, silence begins to open up like fertile land after a storm. You start hearing the subtler layers of reality, the ones constant, noise always covered, the delicate sound of the wind in the leaves, the rhythm of your own heart, beating since before you had a name. Thoughts that once raced now begin to reveal their true nature, and deeper still, the voice of your own essence, the one you've ignored for years, maybe decades, the one that knows who you are beneath all the roles you perform. Silence then becomes a sacred place, a portable temple, where time slows to almost nothing, where simple, conscious presence becomes the most powerful medicine, where the soul, finally heard, begins to remember who it truly is. All this visceral fear of silence is at its core fear of being truly real, of facing that maybe you're not as perfectly happy as your social media photos suggest, that there are parts of you abandoned in some dark corner of memory waiting for reconciliation, that your spirituality may have become just a sophisticated social performance. It's hard to admit these truths, but deeply necessary. The soul was not designed to be ignored for too long. It begins inevitably to manifest in unexpected and often painful ways, in a body that falls ill without apparent cause, in relationships that grow empty, in the constant sense that something essential is missing, even when everything looks perfect on the surface. Silence is the only true therapist who doesn't need to say a single word. It just waits, patiently. And when you finally decide to listen, it doesn't accuse or judge. It simply shows what has always been there. But only those with genuine courage to look can truly begin to transform. In the end, a fundamental choice stands before you right now: to keep running, feeding the endless cycle of distractions, or to sit, even for just a few sacred minutes, before the altar of silence. Monks, hermits, and contemplatives of all traditions do this not out of empty mysticism or superstition. They understood something deep that our noisy civilization has forgotten. The human soul needs space to breathe. It needs true listening. And there is no real listening without the embrace of silence. You can start right now, while these words still echo. You don't need complex techniques or years of training. Just sit comfortably, gently close your eyes, breathe consciously, and listen. Just listen. Maybe you'll hear pain repressed for years, maybe unprocessed guilt, maybe just a raw emptiness that was never given permission to be filled. But stay, Remain, because after the seemingly barren desert always comes the promised land. After the darkest night, the dawn inevitably rises. What in you still deeply fears the encounter with silence? What external and internal noises are you still feeding just to avoid truly hearing yourself? How much longer will you delay this essential meeting? Today, before diving into your busy day full of commitments and distractions, I offer a small but powerful spiritual challenge. For the next 5 minutes, just five, turn off all screens. Gently close your eyes. Don't seek anything. Don't chase anything. Don't try to control anything. Just listen with full attention. Your breath, this constant miracle that sustains your life. Your body, this temple that carries your stories. And if you're truly courageous, your soul, it doesn't scream for attention. It whispers patiently, but you'll only hear it. If you're finally willing to silence everything else, even for a brief moment, you seek peace and harmony. Yet still feed the same noises that keep you away from them. Silence demands courage, not technique. And true spiritual discipline begins exactly where your craving for constant comfort ends. You meditate, you practice, you seek, yet you still skillfully run from yourself, still flee from your own inner abysses, afraid of what you might find in the depths. In the depths. But something in you knows, something in you recognizes. That's why you're here hearing these words, standing before an ancestral path, still hesitating to take the first step. How many more cycles will you repeat before you turn your spiritual routine into a real encounter? Has your comfort zone become your most sophisticated addiction? You say you long for deep transformation. But are you truly willing to fall silent in order to finally receive it? You're still here because something in you wants to awaken, something that recognizes truth beyond words. Choose a new path today, or continue feeding the same noises that have kept you asleep for far too long. The choice, as it has always been, is entirely yours.